Hello, everyone. My name is Melinda Stevens. I'm the editor-in-chief of Condé Nast Traveller UK. I am delighted to welcome you to this special event, which is part of the Sotheby's Inspirational Living series in partnership with Intelligence Squared. The theme tonight is one of my favorites, hidden wonders, which the world is full of. Of course, there is the beauty of everyday things, and also there is the beauty of finding out about the stories behind certain objects that can only enhance and bring extra intrigue. I have with me today three wondrous guests. Joining us from Williamsburg in Brooklyn, Wally Koval, founder of Accidentally Wes Anderson. I like to think that I was an early adopter of this unbelievable Instagram account. And then, of course, it went from zero to hero within microseconds. An online phenomenon, really, that channels the aesthetic of Wes Anderson and is just a beautiful and very special community and place to be in. Wally has curated the aesthetic for Sotheby's Luxury Week. Welcome, Wally.
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Welcome. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Good, good. Joining us from Manhattan, Waris Ahluwalia, an actor who's appeared in a number of Wes Anderson movies. I was watching the Darjeeling Limited again last night, Waris, which you are just wonderful in. He is also a designer and has many new projects on the go, which we will hear more about later. Hi, Waris.
Hello, thank you for having me on here.
Joining us from Geneva, closer from where I am sitting here in London, is Charlie Foxhall, specialist in Sotheby's watches. Your first love, I believe, Charlie, was in weaponry, but we're not here to talk about guns today. So welcome, Charlie.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm very excited to chat with you guys.
So the format of the day really is that we'll be chatting for an hour. There'll be 15 minutes towards the end in which we'll be fielding your questions. So please do start submitting them now. Underneath your video screen, you'll find a web form. Write your name, write your question, click submit, and we'll look forward to picking those up later. So to kick off, guys, you all have a wonderful eye for beauty. You're aesthetes in a way. I would like to describe you as that. I would like you to answer, what was the first thing that you remember truly being conscious of something that struck you as beautiful? Wally, if I start with you.
Yeah, I don't know if there was a specific thing or item. I do remember from a young age, my father was in marketing and advertising, and kind of, in the term of hidden wonders, examining commercials or advertisements in magazines and print ads, and understanding the kind of hidden meaning behind certain things, and more of a less of a specific thing than a general kind of feeling and time.
And capturing your imagination. What about you, Waris?
Like Wally, I don't know if there was a particular moment, and I would say it was more of a seed planted by my mother, watching her in action, her in movement, her living, and then seeing that the importance of the aesthetic evolve over the years.
Yes, for lots, I think our mothers have that early visceral awareness of them. Charlie, what's the first thing that you remember striking you as something gorgeous?
I mean, again, it's not so much a specific object, but more an idea. I suppose it started at school and university, because I've always been fascinated by where art and science meet specifically. So, which is why I liked weaponry. It's why I like watches now. And historically, watchmaking has always been it's always made a concerted effort to make things beautiful, even when it doesn't necessarily have to be beautiful. And this is kind of this idea of art for art's sake, or beauty for the sake of beauty, is what really kind of captured my imagination pretty early on, I think.
Yes, the flair, agreed. So if I start with you, Wally, can you tell me how you started Accidentally Wes Anderson? Because it was relatively recently, despite its huge success.
Yeah, of course. It was summer of 2017. I don't know if it was watching one too many Wes Anderson films on a flight somewhere and getting off a little hazy, a little jet lagged, and maybe the light hit a building just right. But you know, it was also kind of, you know, seeing photos of locations that looked like they were plucked from a Wes Anderson film popping up, but really the desire to want to know more, I guess, kind of the story behind the facade. And you know, by starting to see locations that were beautiful and shared an aesthetic. You know, doing a slight deeper dive, you start to learn these incredible stories that and the people that lived within these places, that worked within them, that built them, that resided there, and you know, they just became so much more fascinating. So I just started documenting them as my own kind of mini travel bucket list, so to speak, for when Amanda, my wife and AWA partner in crime, you know, had time to escape somewhere. We had a laundry list now of locations, and conversation just started to pick up with other individuals who were interested in the same thing, I guess.
The book came out last October during the pandemic, and of course, that's not an ideal, in theory, perfect time to launch a book. But I imagine, in a way, you had quite a captive audience.
Yeah, it was far from ideal leading up to it, that's for sure. After, you know, spending 2.5 years putting something together, and this is supposed to invigorate people to get out into the world and see things in a different light. Luckily, there was a hidden a hidden wonder in and of itself of creating a bit of a joy and allowing people the ability to transport themselves, to escape for a moment. And you know, we were beyond elated that when it did come out, it was so welcomed into people's homes, and the positivity that it brought to people was unbelievable. And still, I mean, when I look at a copy of it, you know, it still brings me a giant smile to know that.
Exactly that. I think there's so much focus on, quite rightly, on delight now and joy and things that are uplifting, which you deliver so well. And consequently, why you've joined Sotheby's for this luxury week. Tell me how that curation has come about.
Yeah, of course. They reached out to us on a whim, and you know, we started looking into some of these pieces that were just. I'm not a jewelry expert. I'm no Charlie. I'm not a watch expert. I can appreciate the beauty. I can appreciate the mechanisms and the history and the story behind them. But I was not aware of how many incredible stories there were to tell about these pieces that maybe I would just look at and say, that's beautiful. And so when they started sharing some of these pieces with us and we were diving into the histories of them, we were blown away, and we're like, yeah, I think this is a good fit. I think we can definitely tell these stories.
So fun. And now I think we're going to look at a little video to give us some insight.
With Mott Street in July.
We'll be coming to focus on some of the highlights of the sale later on. But first up, Waris, I wanted to talk to you about how you got involved with Wes Anderson, because I don't believe you were an actor when Wes asked you to start taking part in his films, correct?
You are correct. No, I wasn't. I never imagined being in front of the camera at any point. I loved the idea of movies and stories, but never in front of it. It just happened. We were friends, and he asked me to read the script and asked me to join him in Italy to do Life Aquatic.
So fun. In terms of already what you had going on in your life, though, I know that you were a partier, a self-proclaimed partier, but I imagine also you always had, you know, we talk about an eye and you ended up becoming a jewelry designer. How did that come about?
Well, it was one of the many things I was doing in exploring at the time in my 20s, and one of those was jewelry, and I fell in love with it, not for necessarily just the stones or the shine or the gold, but it was really a chance to work with incredible craftsmen and artisans, whether they were goldsmiths or diamond cutters or stone cutters or enamelers, but just finding these incredible artisans to work with. And that's what I fell in love with.
It feels like there's more and more of an emphasis again on makers and craftsmanship. There seemed to be an incredible revival. It'll be interesting where that trajectory takes us. But tell me, you've now moved out into a totally different direction. Tell me what you're currently up to as regards your tea making.
Yes, well, I see it as the next step, the next obvious step. Jewelry, tea, it makes, it's the next logical step. But it's there's a thread there. It's still the same. It's still the same idea. It's about the teas are harvested by hand and plucked by hand and processed, made by hand, and it's about community and celebration and joy, as you mentioned earlier, and you gather with friends to have tea, and so it made sense. It's one of the oldest ways of gathering, and it's influenced design in so many countries for centuries, particularly someplace like Japan, or it's had an impact on all the arts beyond just beverage.
There's the ritual of it as well, isn't there? Of the pouring of the tea, etc. I think that gives it reverence. And here we see some other friends, another initiative, a special event that you have happening in London this summer. If you could talk to us about it.
Absolutely. These beautiful elephants that you see, they're life size, and each one of them is made by hand by a tribe in South India that we work with. What I'm excited is that we're bringing all our worlds together. So these elephants have been shipped from India, and they're on their way to London, and they will be appearing in London's royal parks this summer, June 14th, for you to experience the scale and the majestic beauty of an elephant, and stand next to an elephant and explore the idea of coexistence. And as part of that, and tying everything together, we're going to be introducing the UK's first elephant-friendly tea that comes out this summer as well. So it's an amazing way to bring conservation and social justice and these and well-being and health all together, and beauty.
It's interesting you say that connection again to kind of well-being and beauty. A couple of years ago in India, I hugged the trunk of an elephant, and I felt very physically my heart cup kind of fill up. It was something so moving, and the elephant itself felt like and I don't know whether you've had this, like a kind of burnt sausage. But my God, there was, the skin is not dissimilar to burnt sausage, but there is something about their size and their magic that I think is incredibly, it is exceptional. You've had a varied career, Waris. Tell me what the theme is. If we should have a theme, but if you have had a theme that tied it together, what would it be?
Yeah, if there was a theme, it would be humanity. It would be the humanity and our stories that we tell, whether it's film, or I've always said I tell stories in film, or gold, or cashmere, or silk, or wood, or marble, or now tea, or ceramics. I'm not bothered by the materials. It's just telling our human stories, and that the interactions we have that with each other.
Yes, human storytelling at the heart of everything, actually, as you say, despite the medium or in spite of the medium. Thank you, Waris. Charlie, if I turn to you, what does the phrase hidden wonders mean to you?
I mean, I suppose from a watch perspective, at least, for me at least, I mean, watches in and of themselves are hidden wonders, I suppose, in the sense that they're often concealed. You know, you think of wristwatches being under somebody's cuff, or pocket watches being hidden in a jacket or a waistcoat. But you know, there are so many elements of watches which, when you start thinking about them and looking into them, it's essentially a never-ending hole. And it's one actually I fell into when I was trying to think of what I was going to talk about. And the further you explore it, the you find a huge number of different directions you can go in. And the first thing I thought was the movements. The movements aren't something you always see in a watch, and they're certainly not something that most owners will look at in a watch, and they're arguably the most important part. And what I love about watches is that throughout the history of watchmaking, there's always been a determined effort to make these parts that you don't see, beautiful. And sometimes it helps the accuracy, sometimes it doesn't. It's purely for the sake of it. And you know, you can go back as far as 1650, like this one by Richard Crail, was made in London, and this is a year after the English Civil War had finished. And kind of this period of history in the 17th century in the UK, or in England specifically, the Puritans had a relatively strict aesthetic regime, restriction on aesthetic. And so these were deemed or dubbed Puritan watches in the 19th century later. And what constitutes a Puritan watch essentially is this very plain case, which you get a gist of from these images, and a very plain dial with not much detail, not much decoration, if any, and a single hand, which actually had nothing to do with the Puritans. That's purely because it wasn't accurate enough to tell us the seconds or the minutes. But once you open the watch, you see this fantastic, you know, exquisitely decorated, bright gilt engraved movement with its balance and all of the workings inside. And I think the fact that people then went to so much effort, because every single part of this watch was made by hand, the fact that then they went to so much effort to make something so beautiful, something that wasn't actually going to be necessarily viewed on a regular basis. I found that very, very interesting. And from there, you know, I fell even further, and I started thinking about Calvinism in Geneva and Switzerland, and how, you know, that similar aesthetic, the similar aesthetic restrictions actually forced a lot of the jewelry makers to jump ship and become watchmakers, because jewelry was frowned upon, but watchmaking wasn't. And that, in and of itself, was the birth of the Swiss watchmaking movement, the Swiss watchmaking industry. From there, you know, you can travel all over the world, and this watch is a particular piece by William Anthony, made in the 19th century. And again, obviously, on face value, it's far more decorative and far more interesting, but beneath the case and underneath that cuvette, you have this movement. And Chinese watches are dissimilar to virtually every other, in the sense that the movement is entirely decorated. There isn't a single surface that hasn't been touched by an engraver. And also, you know, incredibly, yeah. And again, something that is hidden by what is a relatively dull gilt metal cuvette underneath this beautifully gold and seed pearl and enamel and diamond set case. And from there, like looking at the Chinese market, you find more things that are, yes.
The colours
you find
here.
more. Yes, yeah. So this is very typical of a maker again in London called James Cox, and this is slightly earlier, towards the end of the 18th century. But what you have here is another concealed panel, by which, with the press of a secret button, you reveal this erotic enamel scene, which again
a scene of wickedness. I'm peering from here. What's going on there, Charlie?
Or fun, depending on your perspective, I suppose. But you know, this was something that was fairly personal to the user, and maybe they'd share it with other people, and maybe they wouldn't. But you know, just by looking at it, it's a detail of a watch, an intricate detail of a watch that, you know, unless you know, you can't enjoy. And you know, this is exactly, and this was very specific, like and something that modern watchmakers now kind of make things in homage to, like this Blancpain, which again is a very simple, very elegant dress watch when it's being worn. But the moment you take it off your wrist, the back actually shows another erotic scene, and this time is actually automated, an automaton. So if you slide if you slide a little
Such
slide on the side of the
cheekiness.
case, exactly, and when you slide that slide, you can actually make that couple somewhat more animated. And it's a very complex thing to do in a watch of that size. And that's another thing that I then thought about, was how watches can be beautiful in their complexity, not just their decorative complexity, but their mechanical complexity. And a watch that we have in our sale coming up next week is this Cartier. It's from the 1930s, and it's a fairly standard looking Cartier dress watch, apart from the fact that it's cased in steel, which is incredibly rare and likely unique. But behind that dial, the movement is a twin barrel 8-day movement. So you wind this watch once and it will last you for over a week, which at the time was a significant innovation, and not a very easy thing to accomplish at all, especially when you're dealing with, you know, the micro level of a wristwatch. And they made very, very few of these because they were quite expensive and quite technical to make. And also there were other developments in watchmaking which allowed watches essentially to power themselves, the automatic movement, which were arguably more efficient and much cheaper to produce. So, you know, these watches, this particular watch case in steel is unique, but the movement that powers it is a marvel, really, and one that there are very, very few of. And you wouldn't necessarily know that unless, you know, you take a bit of time to look a little deeper in something.
That
and these
takes
stories,
a particular, sorry, Charlie, that just takes a particular customer, doesn't it? Because from the outside looking in, that's a classic tank shape and size, you know, shape, but it's a hefty price tag, and but not ostensibly so. And that's for somebody who really knows what they're collecting and doesn't want to be ostentatious about it, correct?
yeah, I think so. But at the same time, you know, when you look at the aesthetic for watches in this period, the Art Deco period specifically, you do get schools of the Art Deco which are more flamboyant than others. But there are a lot of schools which are, you know, dare I say it, more fascist, there's more straight lines, slightly more brutalist forms of deco, and wristwatches very much took that on board. So that, you know, there's simplicity in design, which is also a very difficult thing to achieve, good simplicity in design, and something that's complex in and of itself, which is certainly worth recognition.
Amazing. There are lots more than watches in this luxury sales week. Some of my favorites, for example, are these upcoming sneakers, if we can take a look at them. Now, I have a pair of these, I'd like to say. In fact, I'm going to be really showy off and say I have two of these. And when I wear either pair on the streets of Manhattan, I literally get stopped on the street and hounded. But of course, Michael Jordan hasn't put his foot into mine. So tell me tell me any specifics about these.
So yeah, like you say, they were game worn by Michael Jordan in 1985. And I think what I found most interesting when I was reading about these is that when this model was then released that year, Nike sold, I think, in excess of in between 3 or 4 million pairs, just on that basis alone.
It's a hefty number. This sapphire and diamond Cartier brooch is just beautiful. Wally, I have a feeling that A, you love it, and B, that you're thinking that you might be giving it to your wife, Amanda. This is what I've heard on the streets.
I don't know about that. We've not discussed whether we're going to purchase a house or the sapphire yet, but I do know that this one brought us, I mean, this was one of the reasons why we were like, yes, we need to work with Sotheby's to tell these stories, because we started looking into this, and this brooch in particular took us from Kashmir, where the sapphires came from, two of the largest, two of the finest. As far, this is from what I've researched, so other experts can chime in, but two of the finest that apparently still in existence to today, and were given to a woman with like the longest name in the world, Harriet Georgina Harriet Templeton Blackwood,
Which you
and
love
then there's
saying.
more. I've got, it's got a good cadence to it, but Lady Dufferin, for lack of a longer term, and she was from Northern Ireland. In her family lives in this massive castle that is one of the oldest to date, and still their great five or six great nephew still lives there today. But she traveled from there to Canada to Russia, and ultimately ended up as the viceroy of I may be mispronouncing that word, but of India. And through her time there, she spent time developing at the request of the Queen to help with women's health care. And she created these hospitals and these women-owned locations that would help women significantly in a time when that was not a thing. And for her efforts, as a thanks, she was presented with these sapphires, which ultimately were passed down to her daughter-in-law, who I believe was heir to the Guinness throne, which is making me a little thirsty, and it does every time I hear it. But she ultimately had these set by Cartier into their original form, and now they're up for auction. This is the most that I know about any piece of jewelry, solely because of the story.
Listen, it's going to look beautiful on Amanda. That's all I know. Next up is this rather astonishing Ferrari, which I have to say just has, from where I was, just the most beautiful shape and nose. Charlie, can you tell me a bit about it?
Yeah, I've been reading about this. It's from 1963, and it's considered really this model to have having been attributed with perfect proportions, which I think a lot of people will see and agree with. The car is, what interests me, especially with my area, my expertise, is that the Ferrari have managed to make an aesthetically beautiful car, whilst also being incredibly aerodynamically efficient. So again, this kind of mixture of art and science, and I mean, I think it's fair to say that it is a work of art. When it's parked, it's essentially a sculpture, and when you're driving it, it's a Ferrari. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, really.
Win-win. Perhaps the most stunning piece of all, I think, from my eyes, this beautiful tiara by Musi. There's something about the pearls in this, which they're almost like, when you go out in the morning and there's the dew, it's almost like a kind of raindrop made flesh. It's kind of, it's astonishing. Charlie, could you tell us a bit about it, its provenance?
Yes, I mean, it was a gift in 1867 to Maria Vittoria del Pozzo on the day of her marriage to Amadeo of Savoy, who interestingly went on to become King Amadeo I of Spain. It was made by Musi, which is one of the oldest European goldsmiths in the world, an Italian goldsmith, one of the oldest. And I actually had the chance to have a look at this today earlier when I went into the exhibition to help set up. And it's astonishing. And what I realized is that it also transforms the top section. You can unscrew and it turns into an amazing necklace as well.
I think we're going to see a short video of that, actually, just to see how that manifests itself.
This tiara has remained in the House of Savoy for over 150 years. So indeed, the tiara is set with all cushion cut diamonds and circular cut diamonds and a beautiful collection of natural pearls. And the largest one is 20 millimeters length. And it's quite extraordinary to have a collection of 11 drop-shaped natural pearl in one jewel. This tiara is also very interesting because one can wear it either as a tiara or as a necklace. So the bottom part, the bandeau, the diamond bandeau, can be detached, and there are two hooks at the end of each part that allows the wearer to put a ribbon, for example, and wear it either as a bandeau or a choker. And then the top part, with all the scroll motifs and the natural pearls, can be worn as a necklace.
Charlie, obviously we're, coming out of, or some of us are coming out of one side of the pandemic. Can I ask you how people's ways of collecting have changed over the last year and a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think collecting has definitely changed in the sense I think people are looking at more things than they used to look at. And I think one of the positives, if there is a positive from the pandemic and the quarantine, is that people have had a lot more time to learn about things and think about things that they wouldn't necessarily have had the time to do beforehand, or necessarily even thought they had an interest in. And as a result, I think people are diversifying their collections. I think another impetus is in maybe slightly financially volatile time periods. Somebody who was collecting in specifically one category wants to branch out because it does lend a certain security. But I think ultimately the thing fueling this exploration essentially is people giving these objects more time and learning more about them and finding, as we've discussed, the stories behind them, which ultimately make them just infinitely more interesting.
A question, to all of us, well, to all of you really, in the sense that we are all explorers, adventurers, we're all curious. And as a consequence, again, the last year has been, has stymied all of us in so many ways. Wally, how have you coped with?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very tough experience for sure. But I think that through this, it's kind of opened my eyes, and I think a lot of others, to an appreciation for the things that maybe we overlooked. In 2020, we were meant to go to France, to Italy, and 3 or 4 other countries, and that was grounded, and that's okay, because we traded in our world map for a road atlas, and we were able to uncover these beautiful places that we had overlooked, that were in our own home state and in the small towns around us where we were residing, and we found some incredible beauty there. It really, I don't know, I gained a bit of an appreciation, I think, for the fact that maybe we took for granted that we could just hop on a train or a plane and travel off to another place. And I think that it allowed us to, I don't know, almost see things through a different lens. And again, bring back to that like true appreciation of the small things, I guess. And that could be a small town versus flying to another country, seeing a building or something in a slightly different light, and, exploring it a little bit more, as opposed to it having to be a big thing. We really spent a lot of time just kind of being grateful for the fact that those things were around us and uncovering what we could.
And Waris, if I could ask you the same question, how did you find your eye or your situation changing? What gave you pleasure? What did you discover during lockdown that was under anticipated?
Well, when the pandemic hit, we fled the city for a few months, and in that time I got to spend most of my day in nature and in the countryside, and walking in the trees, and realizing how little it is that we actually need. And we surround ourselves with so much, and so much, especially in a city in New York or London, with activities and objects. It's how little we actually need to find happiness. That was a big one.
Simple pleasures.
Yeah.
Charlie, how about you?
Yeah, I suppose before the pandemic, part of my job is very heavily travel focused, going to different countries, meeting different people, finding things that they potentially want to consign with us. So without that, I mean, quarantine for me, as I'm sure for many others, was me essentially spending a large amount of time in a relatively small room. And it made me think and want to make those spaces that I do spend time in as interesting and as beautiful as possible. And I found that, you know, it's relatively easy to accomplish. And instead, you know, like as Wally was saying, the locations close to home, I suppose I was concentrating on objects close to home. And I realized that if you purely do a little bit of research and find out a little bit more than you otherwise would have about, you know, it could be anything, a picture or a piece of furniture or even a rug, you that the story that it tells, and the places that it's been and the people that it was made by, make even the most ordinary thing, quite fascinating, really. And I suppose that's something I hadn't given a huge amount of thought to previously, especially in my own life.
Agreed.
Melinda, how about you? Did you discover any hidden wonders during lockdown? I feel like we've been talking a lot, and you've I want to hear from you.
Listen, so many hidden wonders. Like all of you guys, mostly my life is on a plane or a train going to the other side of the world. And I think for me, it was not just metaphorically, but literally, it was on my doorstep. And we found this cafe. My daughters and I would go on our bicycles, stuff up. I mean, just even as I say this now, stuffing our bicycle baskets with fruit and vegetables sounds horrendously bucolically wonderful, and it was. But mostly there was this little cafe on the corner of where we are in Acton. It's called something like Happy Munchies, more munchies, and they stick happy faces on everything. And it's the most delightfully curated space where the owners just take such care. And as my daughter gets her croissant or hot chocolate there in the morning, they put stickers all over her bag. They fill it with sweets, which I wouldn't allow at all. They have a box of books that you help yourself to as you have your bacon and eggs. It's just the thoughtfulness behind what they do is wonderful. And not, it's covered in plastic flowers mixed in with real flowers. It's just, it was a question of me turning my lens and looking at things with a fresh pair of eyes.
That's awesome. Sounds lovely. I'm excited to come visit one day, and you can show it to us.
Come visit me. We'll all have dinner and more munchies.
Deal.
Deal. So listen, I think we're going to be looking at towards taking some questions right now, which makes me excited, and I hope there are some thrilling ones in the box, if they can be revealed. Ooh. Okay, Wally, you're up.
Oh, here we go.
Of all the stories you worked on with Sotheby's, what was your favorite?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, we talked about, there were two that really stood out to me. The brooch, which we talked about, but just the fact that, again, there was this unveiling of a story and a history that I overlooked personally. So there was kind of this inner finding of looking, beyond just the beauty of something to uncover something in jewelry or in watches, and something that I had not done before. But the most interesting ones, I talked about the brooch. The other one was a Lindbergh watch that ultimately, first off, I am not great with history, which may be surprising, but I found, all these interesting facts about Charles Lindbergh, first solo transatlantic flight, but the fact that there was such a competition, so to speak, for making that flight and what led up to it. And as he's making that flight, legend has it that he buzzed down towards fishermen when he hadn't seen anybody for a long time, and screamed at them and asked, which way is Ireland? And he ultimately did make the flight, made his way to Paris successfully, garnered international recognition, and thereafter developed a watch that would allow him not just to be able to tell the time, but also what direction he was going navigationally. Charlie can talk about it a lot better than me, but the fact that many of those calculations initially were done by hand while they were throttling and doing everything and flying a plane that has, very rudimentary gears and tons of things going on, all mechanical. They're literally calculating their route solo, and ultimately leading up to the fact that, when he landed, one of the first things that ultimately came of that was this watch that did two things in one, and became a staple for many other pilots. So I had no idea on any level of that story. That was probably one of the most interesting ones we found.
Heaven.
I think to that point as well, it's so true, not just of that watch, but of so many others. And it's one of the things that really interests me, is that these fundamentally are tools. They have to be, the epitome of utilitarian. If they don't tell you the right time, then they're just a bracelet with some moving parts, essentially. And again, I mean, the fact that so much effort goes into making these things so accurate and so useful is mirrored by an additional effort to make them so aesthetically appealing. And, the crafts and the craftsmen and women that are essentially kept working because of this industry, I just think is fascinating and often, sometimes sadly overlooked.
Okay, next question, Waris and Wally. Through the lens of Wes Anderson, what would the perfect world trip look like?
Oh man,
Waris,
Waris,
what do you think?
you're up.
Thanks, Wally. Through
You're a well-traveled man.
I imagine it would be gathering all your people and keeping them close together as Wes would. And when we're filming, everyone stays in the same hotel or in the same house or in the same building, same structure. So I would say probably a world trip would revolve around chartering a plane to take people between countries, and then landing into traveling via bus or via train. But wherever we went, we would go together. That would be the trip. No separate. No going off on your own adventures.
So it's a big group. Does
Yeah.
that mean that those groups sometimes fracture, or everyone just comes together in song and dance and feasting and all goes according to plan?
All goes according to plan.
For sure. Wally, what do you think would be Wes's favorite round the world trip?
I love how you put that, Waris. The idea of community. It's something that we've always kind of inherently, without even knowing what your answer was to that, AWA, we always say it, community with a capital C, which bothers all of our friends who are English majors and writers, because it is not a proper noun in their book, but it is in ours, and that's awesome to hear that is synonymous in the actual Wes Anderson world. What I feel like this project has showed is that, I mean, in terms of like location, you can look at the locations that the movies have spanned, the scenes, but it really can be found anywhere. An aesthetic, a story, an interesting piece of something quirky or odd or unique can literally be found anywhere. And I feel that there's stories behind those, and I find that those make the most interesting pieces. For our book, Wes was very kind to pen a few words for the forward. He agreed to do that only after he saw the whole thing, and we 200 locations in the book, and he said that his favorite was a Croatian pancake stand in Krka National Park in Croatia. So I'm just going to add that to the list because that's what he said. So anywhere else is fine. You can create your own itinerary, but I would also add that into the mix.
Lovely. A question for all of you. Is there one item that defines luxury for you? Or indeed, what is your ultimate luxury? Charlie, I'll start with you.
An item, I suppose, an ultimate luxury for me, I suppose it's something that's incredibly well made by people who really care, and people who have a history doing exactly what they do. But I think there also has to be an element of understatedness to it all as well, which I suppose ties into the hidden wonders thing quite well. I like watches because the most important parts, and arguably the most interesting parts, at least personally, are the pieces and the bits that you don't see. And I think, you know, in the modern day, there's a lot of very big watches, very flashy watches, which are beautifully made and exquisitely crafted, but they sometimes just lack that thing that just tips them over the edge of luxury for me, which is I don't know, I suppose a little bit of modesty, a little bit of humility.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
Waris. Yes, hon.
I was trying to point to him in the square above, in this way. I would say, I mean, it is related to it would be related to a watch in the sense that but not in the object itself. It would be what that watch does and what it means, and that's, you know, I'm going to state a very obvious thing, but time. I don't think that there's anything more precious that we have access to, you know, in terms of, you could mine the finest, you know, diamonds and the biggest carats, and it doesn't, you know, doesn't even matter. The time is the most precious resource, and if that watch helps you spend your time properly with you know, with your community with a capital C and with your loved ones, then then it's doing its job. But time.
All right, so Waris stole my great answer. I would, you know, next time I'm jumping the gun. You know, it's interesting because to go off of what both of you just said, it's kind of like this idea of like, what is the item, right? I don't have any necessarily specific items. Yes, a watch would probably be my choice, and I would probably have Charlie help me figure out which one that would be. But I think that the luxury, similar to kind of how we've been navigating this question from Charlie to Waris to me, is almost like a luxury of like disconnecting in a way. My answer from the watch was essentially going to be that it's the dumbest phone you can have. You know, ultimately we're checking our phones all of the time, and I think my screen time's up to an average of 12 hours a day or something, which is, we shouldn't talk to my eye doctor or anybody at this point. But yeah, I think that the luxury of disconnecting, and if something that has that beauty, yes, has a story. I'm pointing to a watch that isn't on my hand, but can also allow you the time together, or the time to, you know, go out. One of the things that I continually say is that one day I'm going to go off into the woods with a bag, and Amanda can come if she wants. I'm bringing the dog, and we're going to go out for a week, and no watches, no clocks, no phones, no nothing, and just kind of allow a reset. And just, you know, you eat when you're hungry, you sleep when you're tired, and you wake up when you wake up with nature. So I think that there's a luxury in a deep reset, and a reconnecting, so to speak, and that can be with people, with yourself, with nature, with whatever it might be. But as long as those items allow for that, I find that there's a very interesting luxury to be said for those pieces.
Lovely. Charlie, we all have to ask you this, I suppose, and put you in a corner on this one. But if you could choose any watch If you could own any watch, what would be your ultimate?
I mean, I have. I mean, arguably, I have.
How many are on your short list?
It's inexhaustible, and it's growing. That's the amazing thing about it. I think if I had to choose anything, I mean, I'd want it to fulfill the criteria that I talked about, and also, kind of to Wally's point as well, it would have to. I think the personal connection, not just to the things around you, but to this particular object is something that could make it luxury. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as you feel a personal connection to it. I suppose it'd probably have to be a Patek Philippe from the 60s. I mean, this probably doesn't mean anything to anybody, but a reference 3424, which was a particular watch. The case was designed by Gilbert Albert, and it's called the Asymmetric, and it's very jazzy, very different from the other things that Patek were producing at the time. And I think, if it was going to be something that was strapped to my wrist once and never came off, I think I would enjoy that for the longest. I think.
Right. Did it hit a chord that I understood? No. Have I written it down? Yes. Before we end, I just wanted to ask you one final question, and that is: the moment travel restrictions are lifted, where are you longing to get to? Waris, I'll ask you.
Well, I'd love to visit, the thing with traveling around the world and being everywhere, as you have friends all over the world. So I'd love to visit my friends. I'd love to come middle of June, I'd love to visit the elephants roaming in London's parks. I'd love to go visit the tea estates that grow our lovely teas. So many places. How about you, Melinda? Where would you like to go?
Well, in my head, I've been in Vietnam. I've got my head out of a train window, and I'm just, smelling different air, looking at different sites with a backpack. There's an amazing hotelier called Arnaud Zanier who's opened a beautiful little property there that we've just put on the front cover of Condé Nast Traveler. And then, there's all sorts of quite smart, there's a smart Anantara train that I love the look of, that's all kind of rattan and has kind of mustard colored seats. But there's a part of me that just wants to rattle around in something quite basic and just not know where I'm going to sleep the next night. That sounds pretty beatific to me. Thank you for asking. Charlie, what about you?
Yeah, I think mine's slightly more close to home. I'm just looking forward to flying back to London and going to a pub.
Despite the prodigious drinks tray you have behind you.
Well, it's a very different environment, though. Drinking on your own is something I'm trying to avoid if I can, But no, I think like that, specifically the French House in Soho, which is, just a wonderful little pub where you drink beer and wine out of little glasses and you talk about things of relatively little importance, but with really interesting people. And there's some of the, I think back to when we were able to do all of this kind of thing, and regardless of what you're actually talking about, so long as you're having a conversation with somebody fairly fascinating, it doesn't really matter. And they're my favorite conversations, I think, and that's one of the things I've missed the most.
Understood. Wally, what about you? Where do you think you'll be going to when you're allowed?
Yeah, I mean, this question comes up in our household a lot. It changes day to day. I was just talking about this with Amanda yesterday, and we're between two. One is we've had multiple places on our list that got kind of pushed to the side. Copenhagen, for sure, one of them. We have multiple locations in the book that we see that we've utilized, worked with these hundreds of photographers to pull these together, and so many interesting stories to be told. But the one that we've started to kind of craft out and continues to come back to the top of the list is we were married a few years ago, and we always promised we're going to go on this honeymoon. It's going to happen. And Amanda has always wanted to go and visit Sri Lanka. And our friends pre everything were there and told us how wonderful it was. And I think I'm going to just need to keep that at the top of our list. And one day, that may not be the next one, but one day that will happen.
I believe it will. I would like to wrap up today by saying thank you to these lovely, gorgeous boys across Zoom, Wally, Koval, Waris, Ahluwalia, and Charlie Foxhall. If you'd like to know more about the Sotheby's Luxury Week in Geneva and the sales that's coming up on May the 11th, please visit sotheby's.com or the Sotheby's app. My thanks to Sotheby's and Intelligence Squared for their help in putting this together today. I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.